Good evening, YouTube. So today I was watching under some of the comments that were made on a previous video recommendation that basically made me want to explore more about climate change. And so the feelings about climate change here in Canada are fairly straightforward. We have a lot of people here that love the environment, that love nature to thrive and to exist, um, and to grow. And these people absolutely hate it if nature is not permitted to thrive and grow as it should. So there is a great power base here for those that wish to be in support of the environment because they have a very strong voice. And so I feel that the Canadians have done a great deal for the environment and environmental regulation for oil companies and so on. However, I do feel that there is an element missing today, and it came to me when I watched this video about Dr. Patrick Moore, someone whom Maxime Bernier cited when he was talking to the Toronto Star. And so I decided to look into Dr. Patrick Moore and to try to learn more. So in this video I will break down his conversation here, and I will comment on a few points, but I will try my best not to interrupt him too much. So thank you for your attention.
NGOs that he says have little regard for the truth, but are rather peddling an agenda. Freeman Dyson told me, he said, well, just look around the world right now, it's greener. And yet then when I see that happen, like...
That's a proven fact.
Yeah, well, the reforestation or the regrowth in the Amazon has been phenomenal. Then I read comments in the New York Times like, well, it's ridiculous that this should have happened in the first place. You can't be like replanting or recovering from what was an environmental disaster by putting more carbon into the atmosphere. It was as though you cannot have good news. I find it quite remarkable. I get to the point where like the voices are so loud that I'm going, okay, how do I find where there actually is truth?
Well, where there's truth is that carbon is the basis of all life on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And where there's truth is that carbon dioxide is the source of that carbon for all life on Earth. And it's also true that for the last 600 million years, of which we have a reasonable record, CO2 has been declining in the global atmosphere to the point where at the peak of the last glaciation, when the oceans absorb more CO2 than they do when they're warm, it was cold,
mm-hmm.
CO2 dropped to 180 parts per million.
Yeah.
And that is only 30 parts per million above the death of plants. And it is surmised because there's an ash layer associated with these peaks in cold during the glaciations.
30 parts per million above the death of plants.
Yes, and it's very clear from my paper that I've just published that if we had not intervened by putting the balance back into the carbon cycle, which was out of balance, it's a really interesting story because it's life itself that has sucked the CO2 out of the atmosphere over the millennia and put it into fossil fuels, but that's a very minor part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The big part of it is what's called carbonaceous rocks, limestone, chalk, and marble. And those are the remains of shells of marine calcifying organisms. And the calcium carbonate is what those shells are made out of.
Mm-hmm.
The carbon in the calcium carbonate is from CO2 that the oceans absorbed from the atmosphere. And that is what we're fracking for oil and gas, are those marine deposits of the shells of coccolithophores, which are minute phytoplankton that learned how to build. Many marine organisms, started 500 million years ago, many marine organisms learned how to control calcification. Mm-hmm. Biomineralization is the general term for it. Our bones, for example, are a case of biomineralization. But we did it for our skeletal structure, so we could stand up.
Mm-hmm.
The reason marine organisms did it was to basically build an armor plating around themselves, like clams and mussels and coral reefs and crabs. All of these are calcareous. And the calcium comes from the seawater. The carbonate comes from the air and is dissolved in the water. And so these huge deposits of shale are actually calcium carbonate. They are the shells of those plankton. The oil and gas is the organic matter of the living plankton that died, and fell on the bottom of the ocean. But 100 million billion tons of carbonaceous rock represent carbon dioxide pulled out of the atmosphere. And because the Earth has cooled over the millennia, nature is no longer putting CO2 into the atmosphere to offset this. So the curves are there to look at on the internet. You can see it. CO2 has been declining to where it is getting close to the end of plant life. And another 1.8 million years, if you just take that line and draw it straight down, another 1.8 million years, life would begin to die on planet Earth for lack of CO2.
Not because of an excess.
There is no such thing as an excess of CO2 under any real-world circumstance.
Well, the message out there is pretty clear that there is such a thing.
No, there isn't. Because it's proven fact, for example, that greenhouse growers they actually buy CO2 in bottles.
Well, I know, they pump it in.
They pump it in to get it up to 1,000 parts per million. The optimum CO2 level for plant growth, which, when you think about it, is the basis of all the animal life on Earth. Every insect, every vertebrate, every invertebrate, all the things that are not plants depend on the plants for their existence. The sugars the plants produce through photosynthesis are the energy supply for the whole world. What are those sugars made out of? Water and carbon dioxide. Those are and when you burn fossil fuels, which are the result of photosynthesis, what do you get? Water and carbon dioxide and some contaminants, which we know how to clean. But that's what basically comes out of the tailpipe, is water and CO2. Plants take those two things and turn them into glucose, sugar, and everything else goes from there. So we should care about the plants. And if we cared about the plants, we'd put the CO2 up to 1,000, and it's only at 400 now. And actually, it may not be possible for us to get it to 1,000 just due to the fact that there's only so much fossil fuel. But the other interesting thing is the carbonaceous rocks, limestone, that's what we make cement with. And when we make cement, about 5% of the CO2 emissions from humans today in this world is from cement production by burning calcium carbonate and creating calcium oxide, which is lime, which is the major constituent of cement, and CO2 goes up. So we can actually burn lime with solar energy. By focusing solar heat onto lime, we can burn it. So even if we run out of fossil fuels and the CO2 starts going down again, say 3 million years from now, humans will still be here 3 million years from now. You see, I'm that optimistic.
Well, we've only been around for about 120, 130,000 years as Homo sapiens.
As Homo sapiens, yes, but the primates have been here since the 65 million years or so. So primates began a long time ago. And no doubt we will evolve as time, especially because of our technology making life so easy compared to what it was when average life age was 25, 30.
Going back to 1750, which you cited earlier.
Yes. So
I don't want to go back there.
So what we can do is we can keep the CO2 in the global atmosphere at a good level for plants for hundreds of billions of years, because that carbonaceous rock, which we can easily dig out of the ground and burn, either to make cement or eventually maybe just to make CO2, so that our plants will grow, we can do that into the foreseeable future.
So, a lot of the points I find here from Dr. Patrick Moore are very interesting, because I've never heard the perspective from that angle before. So just a little background on Patrick Moore. He is the co-founder of Greenpeace, and as I understand it, and I don't claim to be an expert on him, but he left Greenpeace because originally they had formed it for the idealism of preventing nuclear testing I think, bomb testing and so on in Alaska, if I'm not mistaken, and also to prevent whaling. So, and other reasons that for him were personal. His educational background, I think, is in ecology. So his interest lies in how the environment interacts with each other, and it's probably much more complex than that. But I would say he's a very foremost figure to tell anyone how the environment truly functions. So that aside, he walked away from Greenpeace because he began to notice a trend of anti-humanistic stance and sensationalism, as he put it, and growing into some kind of a radicalism. So later on in this video, I believe he will talk about climate change as a religion. He'll refer to it as a religion. And it's interesting that he should put it that way, because the more that I think about it, the more I realize that the value placed on climate change is very interesting. It's those that support it seem to be extremely devout. And if you have a conversation with them from another perspective, say you try to come at them on any way, you could be in business, or you could be like the stance that Dr. Patrick Moore has here, where he's saying, that we actually need carbon. You get classified as a radical, and really quickly by these people. And I suspect the reason for that is because they don't want to really have a free debate about the validity of climate change. So that aside, I would like to go on with the clip. So,
thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. TV, and help us to continue
burning of coal for power generation, for electrical power generation, if it's the number one source of CO2 into the atmosphere. Why get so worried about it? And then
I'm not against using coal to make electricity, but, and there's a big but, two big buts here.
Mm-hmm.
One, natural gas is a lot cleaner.
Yes.
And if there's natural gas, why not use it? Two,
so cleaner in the other emissions that come from the burning of the fuel.
They're trying to make out now that natural gas has more CO2 emissions than coal. They're doing this out of the States. It's the anti-fracking movement, which is also based on nothing, like the anti-GMO movement is.
Well, it has more methane, doesn't it?
Methane, yes.
Yes.
They're trying to change the name of natural gas to methane, because that's its chemical name.
Mm-hmm.
But it is natural, and they don't like it to be called natural anymore. So now they're calling it methane and saying that it's destroying the climate. It's another fabrication. But back to coal. The reason not to burn so much coal is because in the future we're going to need liquid fuel.
Mm-hmm.
When the gas and oil are from marine deposits, the coal is from land-based trees and that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of it. When the oil and gas runs out, and transportation depends on having a gas or liquid, we're not going to end up shoveling coal into our car.
We're not going back to the steam
So
engine.
coal can't go in a pipe, is the problem. It can't go through a hose. Whereas liquefying coal is going to be possible. Well, it's being done now in South Africa. There's a huge facility there. When South Africa was under the embargo, they don't have any oil or gas. They do now offshore, I believe, but they didn't then.
Mm-hmm.
They're turning coal into fuel for cars, and this can be done. And so it would be a good idea to save the coal for that, because transportation needs liquid or gas, and coal can be made into liquid or gas. Especially with high temperature nuclear, you can actually turn 100% of the coal into liquid fuel with no CO2 emissions, or virtually no CO2 emissions in the process. Whereas now 2/3 of the coal is used for producing heat and hydrogenation, and you really only get 1/3 of the coal turned into fuel. it's still worth them doing it because there's no other alternative. You know, during the Second World War, Germany ran out of oil. And what did they end up doing? Wood gasification trailers towed behind their buses and cars, and on the roof of their cars they put wood gas. And we're not going back to wood gas.
No.
That's for sure. What we're going to go for is
Yeah, but I've had people tell me, "Oh no, that's the future."
wood gas.
I'm thinking, how are we going to do that? How are we going to be able to do that?
Now, if the problem, here's how I put it: if we stop using fossil fuels tomorrow, there wouldn't be a tree left on this planet in 2 years.
Because we need them for fuel.
Because we'd have to burn them for fuel.
Yeah.
And we don't want to do that.
No, we don't. So, you've spent your entire life in this. You are a scientist. You have a PhD in ecology. You've thought about and focused on carbon for more than 25 years now as a focus of your work. Does it not cause you frustration that even you keep running into so many obstacles in getting people to listen to what you have to say?
Well, what has happened is a new cult religion has been born on the issue of climate. I think it might, some people say it's because Christianity and the other religions have been, you know, people sort of go, no, there isn't actually an old guy with a white beard.
Mm-hmm.
This is all bunk, right? And so secularism has come to
faded
rule.
away.
But people, it seems that people still need a religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so the trouble with the climate issue is it's not only a new religious movement, it's a new political movement, and the scientific establishment, because of the huge taxpayer money going into it, is totally bought into it, and so is the political establishment, and so are the business. I mean, even the big oil companies are pandering to the politicians on this subject. The biggest problem we have on climate is the fossil fuel companies themselves will not defend themselves and will not even listen to an alternative explanation of this situation.
This is our second break, but I'm anxious to get back to this. We'll be back in a moment.
So, there you hear it. It's very interesting. I find it very, very insightful, the points that he's trying to make. He talks about religion being destroyed, the idea of Christianity being destroyed, and secularism taking over. And so the need for a religion is there for human beings. I find it to be a very insightful point, because it's if you really analyze, if you get into a debate with somebody on climate change, you'll find out that a majority of them don't want to hear the other side. It's a value, a belief, and it's very deeply rooted in their personality. So when you question it, they become quite angry. So I would say that that Dr. Patrick Moore is right, that the climate change has evolved from an idea, from something, into a religion of, it's very fanatical in a way. If you've ever experienced a climate change rally, these things can get pretty violent under the right circumstances, and you wonder why. It's really become exactly as Dr. Moore put it, like a cult movement. So it's moved away from the cause that perhaps initiated it in the first place. So let me just say this. This video will not be the end. I will release another. There's about looks like approximately 10 minutes and a half in this clip, and thank you to, I think, the Vancouver Sun for publishing it. I have it here. Yep, Vancouver Sun. And you know, Dr. Patrick Moore is right. I'm finding a lot, especially here in Canada, a lot of people that, because of the climate change narrative, they try to inspire fear in people to act. Fear and well, fear mongering, let's say. And I'm happy that that Maxime came up with that point, because it's really important, like that you understand that the root of climate change is actually, at this time, seems to be rooted in inspiring people to take action because of fear. Like, if we don't take action, the world's going to end, kind of idea, apocalypse, if you will. So it's really interesting for Patrick Moore to label it as a cult religion. So, that being said, I want you to know that I find this clip to be extremely insightful, and that Patrick Moore seems to be a person, he's definitely close to Greenpeace, so that makes him a very legitimate figure in the analysis of what's happening with the entire movement, because he was there at its origins, you could say. And he's educated in ecology, so he's very well placed to know what he's talking about, and to know how it actually functions, the systems. So I would just like to say thank you for your time and attention, and I again will be releasing a part 2 to this analysis. And I find Patrick Moore to be extremely genuine in his pursuit, because his frustration is palpable. You see that he is looking at the situation, and he sees a radicalism developing there, or already existing there, that's gone out of control, that's forgotten about the science that supported the viewpoint in the first place, that the movement is so far removed from science now. It is a religion in that sense. So, with that being said, thank you again for your time and attention, and I hope that you can like and subscribe for my channel if you like this video, and I will be releasing part 2 very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.